Hello. My name is Craig Santiago. I am the assistant branch manager here, and I'm going to help present our presenter here for this afternoon. We are presenting Women of Abstract Expressionism. We have local artist, designer, and creator of the Women's Art Project, Flo Solcito, and she will do our presentation this afternoon. So take it away.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you to Lantana Branch Library for this beautiful venue. Thank you, Craig, and your interest in promoting the arts. Assisting me today is Lissy Bartlett. She's my design technologist, and she enjoys working with artists and other creatives. I see familiar faces here today and some that are not, and I thank you all for being here as well. All right. Okay, part one, we're going to talk about the Women's Art Project. Being an avid student of art history, I began discovering almost daily women artists that I had never heard of. So I began to take note, and I did this literally. I would record a name in my sketchbook, as you see here, and I would also note what I wanted to remember about that artist and why I felt connected to them, like commonalities. And then I found this quote by Hall Rockefeller that really summed it all up. The heart palpitations I feel when I crack open a new artist biography or walk into an exhibit of an artist I've never heard of. The feeling is, how did I miss this? How is there this whole universe I didn't know existed? That's what I'm here for. So I don't know if you've ever noticed that or had that experience, but this exactly sums up what I felt. This got me thinking, what should I do with all the information? Then it occurred to me that maybe it just wasn't personal. Maybe it was something that I could share. And I could do that in my own artworks and also in my art talks. So this painting that you see on display here is the first of the Women's Art Project. And it documents the first 58 women I discovered in my journey. And the ones that are highlighted in red are the ladies that we're going to talk about today. Now, if you like, you can take a picture of this, and I invite you to take your own journey to discover who these women are. And if you don't want to do that, we also have some handouts that you can pick up towards the end. So what is the status of women in the art world today? Well, did you know that the #1 textbook about art, which is called The Story of Art, it's a best-selling book around the world, mentions one female artist in 688 pages. That's pretty astonishing, really.
Which one?
It's Eric Grombrick's The Story of Art, and the newest version has one female. The first version of that book had 0.
What's the name of the artist?
Oh, you know what? It's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. But you know what? It was one, if I recall, that I had not heard of. So, yeah. Maybe somebody can Google it. That would be cool.
Lissy's on it.
51% of all working visual artists in the United States are women. 96% of all art sold at auctions are by men. 70% of fine arts degrees are held by women, and 11% of art acquisitions for top museum permanent collections are by women. 41% of the profit is generated in the top 0.3% of the art market, and there are no women represented there.
It's Kathy Kolwitz.
Yeah.
Yes, see, who's heard of Kathy Kolwitz? I had not, full disclosure. I have to share that this is true. Also, you'll see if a man signs his work, the value goes up. If a woman signs her work, it goes down. I took an art workshop, maybe like probably 20 years ago. It was all women in the class, and there was a male teacher. And at one point, he said, ladies, he said, I'm gonna share this with you because I think it's really important. He said, as you go on to make work, when you sign your work, you put your first initial and you put your last name. Nobody has to know that you're a woman. So I often think of that and I'm like, was he doing us a favor or was that an insult? Speaking of the art market, these are the record art sales by a man and a woman ever in all time. So for a man, it was Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi that was created in about 1500, went for $450.3 million.
Wow.
No one knows how much of this painting was actually done by Leonardo though. It's said that his apprentices had a hand in it, and it was purchased by an Arab prince, and as far as I could find, the exact location of its whereabouts are unknown. And note the small size, it's only 26 inches by 19, so that's not very big. On the other hand, by a woman is Georgia O'Keeffe, which I think hopefully she is one that we have heard of. That was from 1936, it's 40 by 48, so it's much bigger. It must be spectacular in real life. And that went for 44.4, so roughly 10% of the value of Leonardo's painting. Among living artists, the record is held by Jeff Koons, which is 91 million, and Jenny Seville, awesome artist, at 12.5 million. So that kind of gives you a perspective. Actually, also, I just read a few days ago, there was a record set by Andy Warhol, one of his Marilyn Monroe paintings, and I think that was the highest paid for a 20th century artist. And I believe it's 195 million that one for.
I was just gonna say, Cezanne painting that was bought by the Saudi Arabia, that was like about 135 million.
Yeah, but it wasn't more than that. Yes, yes. There's a lot of big ones out there, and especially the ones by men. So that's where we are today, but we're here to talk specifically about the women artists in the time of abstract expressionism. So let's step into a time capsule, and I'm going to take you there. New York City, 1951, this is where it happened. Everything was headed in a new direction. The Great Depression was over, World War II was in recent history, and everybody was ready for a new start. So not only did visual art change, music changed, literature changed, fashion, big band music was turning into smoky club, improvisational kind of jazz music. Poetry was turning to the beats with the innovative style of Jack Kerouac and the other beat artists. And the #1 book was Catcher in the Rye, which is a book about rebellion. Thelonious Monk's Jazz was the #1 album, and the Sporty Hudson Hornet was the #1 car that year. Women's fashions changed. Christian Dior had come out with a new look at the end of the 40s. Now that we didn't have to scrimp and save, there was lots of fabric and women could go big. And the big skirts came out and were popular through the 50s. Another interesting thing happened. During the war, women got a little bit more independence. They got to go out, they got to go to work. You've heard about Rosie the Riveter, and they liked that. But then the men came home and they wanted their jobs back, and the women had to go back in the kitchen. So this kind of illustrates that really well. I love this. Don't worry, darling, you didn't burn the beer. It's a Schlitz commercial from that era. Kind of sums it up, right? So that's where we are. Now, these artists, most of them live downtown in New York City, and Abstract expressionism, and let's just talk about what that is. That means a type of art that is non-objective for the most part. There's different types, but for the most part, it's an art that comes from feeling and from gesture rather than painting a picture of something that you see in your outside world. Well, they were doing it. Jackson Pollock was already doing it in the 40s, and so was Lee Krasner. They were the first generation of abstract expressionists. But they weren't getting taken seriously. They weren't getting into the big shows. Sometimes there would be shows, and there were a lot of artists that came during the war from Europe, and they would be in there, but it wasn't just Americans. So this group of people, they had a couple of gathering spots. One was the 8th Street Club, and one was the Cedar Bar, which was in Greenwich Village. They didn't have, needless to say, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have social media, they probably didn't even have the phone. Maybe they did. So the only way that they could interact and share with each other was at places like the Cedar Bar. So this was a popular hangout. It was smoky, it was boozy if you could afford it, or you could suck on a cup of coffee all day long. You could get a plate of spaghetti for $1, or you could do what they sometimes did was make ketchup soup, which is exactly what it sounds. You get a packet of ketchup and mix it with some warm water and voila, it's soup. So they debated and they talked, and I think that no one ever agreed to disagree, that's for sure. So one night, as they were finishing up the evening, they were walking along and they came upon a vacant storefront, and someone said, "Why don't we have our own show? I think we could do that." And that was the origins of the 9th Street Show. And the 9th Street Show today is known as the birthplace of abstract expressionism. A vacant storefront was formerly a furniture store, and the rent would be like $70 for 2 months. Leo Castelli, who was kind of an up-and-coming curator, gallerist at the time, he sort of oversaw the hanging of the show, which he used to joke he had to do 2 or 3 times because everybody argued about where their art was going to go. They managed to cough up an extra $200 to make the place look like an art gallery, paint the walls white, notice the bare light bulbs there. And they did have to agree on a few rules. Only 1 piece per artist was allowed. The show opened May 21st, 1951, and that's when what we call the New York School officially debuted. So the New York School was this particular group of abstract expressionists working in New York City at the time.
Oh, but it wasn't all women, I just read. Right?
No, there were 72 artists and 11 of them were women. And Mary Gabriel in her 2018 book, which we have over there called 9th Street Women, she focuses on 5 of those women, and those are who we're going to be talking about today. And the reason that she did pick those 5 out was because they went on to be collected in major museums and have, lifelong influence and notoriety. Now, it's interesting to note that something similar at the same time was happening in San Francisco, but it was really separate and remote and not having like internet thing we have now. It was truly a separate thing, but it was happening then. The show was repeated from 1953 to 1957, and altogether about 50 women were represented. This was an interesting story during the show. Each artist had to mind the shop, so to speak. And one artist one day was doing that, and he noticed a small, elderly African-American woman looking in the window, and he invited her to come in. And she's like, "Well, how much does it cost?" And he said, "It's nothing, just come in." So she came in and she carefully looked at everything, and he noticed that she stopped in front of some of his favorite pieces. And he started to talk to her. He goes, "Well, do you know a lot about art? Are you a collector?" And she's like, "Nope." And he said, oh, so she goes, I just like pictures. She says, I cut them out of magazines and I put them on my walls just because I like them. And he was silent and he was thinking about it. And she turned to him and she said, you know, the people that created this, they must be so wise. And he was just so taken that it occurred to him that knowledge about art and to understand art are two separate things. And I think that in abstract art, that's especially true. Okay, so now we're going to talk about photojourney. Also wanted to mention that abstract didn't pop up from nothing. It came about after Picasso, Matisse, and there was also a woman artist in there that I hadn't heard of, Emily Charmy. And they did what was called modernist art at the time. All of these abstract artists, they painted in a figurative manner. They knew how to draw, they knew how to do that. And this was a movement that came out of that. So you just don't start as an abstract artist. So these are the 5. They span 20-year age difference from the oldest to the youngest. 2 of them are identified as being from the first generation, which would be Lee Krasner and Elaine de Kooning, and the other 3 were definitely the second generation. There were now 11 women, I told you, in the 9th Street show, so I think it at least bears mentioning who the other 6 were, in case you wanted to check them out. So they were Pearl Fine, Jean Stubing, Anne Ryan, Sonia Sekula, Marguerite Guitou-Youp, and Dave Schnabel. Were they all friends? No, not necessarily. They were very competitive. Sometimes they were friends, and if you read Mary Gabriel's book, she does an excellent job of showing you how they kind of wove in and out of each other's lives through the years. And the first generation, notice, they were the innovators, and the second generation kind of took it and ran with it and expanded it. So that's kind of what that means. Lee Krasner, 1908, she was born. She was, like I said, the first generation, and she's what I call a wife of. 3 out of these 5 women were wives of, meaning that they were married to a male artist, a big male artist in all cases. Lee, however, she was a presence in the art world in New York way before she met Jackson. She was already making work, she was already showing, and she had her own thing going. She had to work her way through school, and she was part of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, which was a program that the government implemented during the Depression to put people to work. A lot of artists were involved with that. They painted like murals, and Lee said that is what enabled her to paint big, is her experience doing murals for the WPA. She also raised the value of abstract expressionist art, and I'll explain how she did that in a moment. When she found out about Jackson, it was love at first sight. I think he won her heart with his art, but they were a little bit doomed because Jackson, as everyone probably knows, had a horrendous drinking problem. So she spent the years that they were together promoting his work and trying to get him to stop drinking. But she never stopped working. At one point they moved to the Springs in Long Island where they could have a little bit more solitude. He had a big barn that he would paint in, and she had a little room upstairs in the house, but she kept working, and she was the quintessential 1950s housewife. She really did it all. Now, Pollock died in 1956. They had decided that they needed to take a break. She went to Europe and he had a mistress and his mistress's friend with him, and he crashed his car very close to the Springs home where they lived. And he was killed, and the mistress's friend was also killed, and the mistress survived. So as shattered as she was about that, her work took off after he was gone. She moved into the barn. She was able to work big, and she went on to have a very successful career. So how did she raise the value of abstract expressionist art? Well, in 1955, Pollock's agent tried to sell one of his paintings called Autumn Rhythms to the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, for $8,000 or $10,000, and it was rejected because of the price. So Alfred Barr, who was the gentleman who ran MoMA at the time, came back in 1957. He came back for it, and we quoted the price of $30,000. He said, "What? How is that?" And she's like, "He's dead." And that she instantly brought the price up. Of course, that's nothing today. So eventually, so he passed on it, incidentally. He didn't buy it, but the Metropolitan Museum of Art did buy it, and it's still currently in their collection. Love this picture of Lee in her, when she moved into the big boy studio, and a lot of her paintings in the background. There's an excellent biography also on the table of Lee Krasner, and they used this picture for their cover. You can also visit this in Long Island. You can go to the Springs and visit this house, and it's incredible. And the barn. So let's look at some of her work. These are a couple of her pieces. These are actually collages. She would make work, and she wouldn't like it, and she would cut it up, and she would put it together and make something else. And these two pieces are that. The one on the left is called Milkweed, and she did that in 1955. It's collage and oil paint on paper, and there's canvas in there as well. On the right is Genesis, and that was from 1971. So much later, but yet sort of similar in a way. And they're big. The one on the right is 82 inches by 134 inches. And the one on the left is 82 inches by 57 inches. Here's something from Lee in her own words.
I think all painting is biographical. I think you can read any artist if you take the trouble to. The first approval comes in this form. This is so good you would not know it was done by a woman. Yeah.
I wouldn't have that sense of humor. It's the most peculiar feeling.
Yeah, I know. You put it beautifully. It's a most, you don't know quite what to do with the damn thing.
How does a painting incubate?
Heavy. What do you mean?
Trying to get into your head when you're standing there in front of that wall.
You just take a deep breath and hope for the best.
I love
And
that.
get into it. And sometimes, as I say, it comes through miraculously. Anything can send me off to when it's time to get started, and then when the momentum gets going, the rapport starts, then I'm in a work stretch. I did batch of drawings. I had them pinned up in the whole studio. I went in one day, I hated them, and I tore them all up and threw them on the floor. When I went into the studio again, which was several days later, they looked pretty good that way. This seems to be a work process of mine. I'm constantly going back to something I did earlier remaking it, doing something else with it, and coming forth with another more clarified image, possibly. I don't know. I can tell when the thing's alive and going, and that, gets me all my adrenaline going, and then I want to stay with it. I pretty much know by now. And when it's a dead duck, I know that too. Colors for me is a very mysterious thing. I might say, I haven't done anything in blue, I'm going to use blue, but then it's like it comes out green or Elizabeth crimson or something. I'm aware of that, I'm conscious of that kind of thing, but I don't try to change it. I don't say it's got to be blue. And I insist on letting it go the way it's going to go rather than forcing it. That kind of thing I hold on to zealously. I think that's the essence. Don't tamper with that. Don't will it. Don't force it. Let it come through in its own terms.
This is some of Lee's work. On the upper left is little images. This is her little series that she did when she worked in a little room. The bottom left was kind of a collaboration between her and Jackson. He helped her with the wagon wheel and the legs, and she did the mosaic, and he helped her pour the cement. So it's one of, I believe, just a couple of examples, and it's at the Springs house. The picture in the center, is self-portrait. So what I was mentioning about abstract artists starting out in other styles shows you, and most of them did do self-portraits. And then this last picture here is very poignant. It's called Birth, and she painted it right after Jackson passed away. It was painted very quickly, and a lot of angst and feeling in there. Krasner enjoyed so much success after Pollock. She had a major American retrospective in 1983, right before she passed in 1984 at the age of 75 from an intestinal ailment, and she had acute arthritis. She's known as the founder of the New York School and a pioneer of abstract expressionism. Then we have Elaine de Kooning. She's also identified as first generation, although she's kind of borderline. She was another wife of. She was a writer and a reporter for Art News, so she had her finger in everything too, and was very aware and knew what was going on. She was really definitely a portrait artist. That was really her thing. Although she did abstract, and she did abstracted portraits. She was, interestingly, she was commissioned to paint John F. Kennedy. And she did not like to be called a woman artist. She was just an artist. She didn't have any use for the gender. She's from Brooklyn, where she was born in 1918. She was of comfortable means. Originally, she was a math student at Hunter College, and then she had a wake-up moment, and she changed to art. She was the only one to take her husband's name. Her name was actually Free, Elaine Free. Of course, she was married to Willem de Kooning, who was kind of neck and neck with Jackson Pollock, very competitive. Her mother did teach her about art, and as well as her siblings. And an interesting bit of trivia is that her brother Conrad designed the prototype for the barcode. Sadly, she was also the wife of an alcoholic. And actually many of these women did also become alcoholic. But Bill was her mentor. He used to give her still lifes to draw. Draw that. She would do it, he'd rip it up, and he'd say, do it again. And that is really the method that a lot of artists do. We know we have to do it over and over and over again. And he did teach her that. The Kennedy portrait that she did, as you see her doing here, it was like 10 feet tall, and the meaning of that was it was supposed to be larger than life, and it definitely was. I love this quote too. One of de Kooning's friends once asked her what it was like to work in the shadow of her husband, and she replied, "I don't paint in his shadow, I paint in his light." Oh, I thought that was beautiful. So here's some of her work. This is a self-portrait, which I adore because it is so timeless. It was painted in 1946, but you can look at this and it could have been painted in 1986 or 1996, or it kind of has a timeless quality to it, in my opinion. Also, you notice that the objects here, these are all kinds of things that were in the still lifes that she used to draw. And of course, there's also the usual ashtray and a cup of coffee here. I like that. Then the painting on the right is a painting of Robert De Niro's father. And to me, it's a good example showing her portraiture, but also kind of going in the abstract direction. A painting to me is primarily a verb, not a noun, an event first, and only secondarily an image. And that is I love that quote, because that's what abstract expressionism is about. It's artifacts left over from the experience of painting. This is another one of her pieces. She saw this statue of Bacchus, I believe, in Paris, and she did a bazillion different sketches and versions of it, and this acrylic painting came from that. Now, this is the first time we're showing an acrylic here. It started to become more widely used in the 1960s. This Bacchus is a 19th century sculpture of the Roman god that she saw in Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. Elaine died in Long Island at the age of 70 from lung cancer. That was in 1989. She was survived by Willem. They did separate, but they got back together in the 70s, and when he was suffering from dementia, and she was with him until she passed. He did survive her, though. She's remembered for her wide range of talents, including both abstract and figurative painting, being a journalist as well as a teacher, and she did not like labels. Helen Frankenthaler, she was the youngest of the five, and she was second generation. She was another wife of, but she was a wife of Robert Motherwell, and they didn't get together till rather late in her career, so there wasn't much of they were equals. They were on equal footing there. She was inspired by Jackson Pollock, and she created her own method. She was the daughter of a politician, and she did enjoy a privileged upbringing. When she was a little girl, there's a story in Mary Gabriel's book. She liked to take a piece of chalk, and she was with her mother, her caretaker, and she would leave school, and she would try to make one line with the chalk all the way until she got home. And she used to like to play with her mother's nail polish in the sink, which I'm sure didn't go over very well either. So, something big happened on October 26, 1952. About a year before that, however, Helen went to an exhibit and saw the work of Jackson Pollock. She saw the paint splatters, the black, and you've seen them before. Made an impression on her. She was like very taken aback. She didn't know what, she knew it was something. So she went about her way. She went on a big trip to Nova Scotia with her boyfriend, Clement Greenberg, who was an art critic at the time. And she spent a lot of time doing watercolors and sketches of landscape. And she came home, and this is going on a year later. She had a new big studio that she shared. She had it partitioned off. And this all of a sudden came up. She had this idea, you know what, I'm gonna try this. So she threw an unprimed canvas on the ground. She took a piece of charcoal, made some marks on it, and she took oil paint, that's what they use, that's all they use then. She diluted it down with a bunch of turpentine so it was super watery, and she made puddles. And she said, I don't know what this is. So she knew it was something, but she didn't know what. She called her studio mate over, and she's like, what do you think? And he thought the same thing. He didn't really quite know what to make of it. So she called some artist friends over, Kenneth Nolan and Morris Lewis, and they loved it. They didn't know completely why, but they felt it was a bridge between Pollock and what was possible. So she had taken Pollock's method of working on the floor. She's the only one of these five that I know that did work on the floor. And she made it her own. Instead of black, she used color. Instead of drips, she made pools and puddles. And the piece that we're talking about is the one on the left. It's called Mountains and Sea, and it's a seminal piece of artwork that began something called the color field movement, and the soak stain method is what they call her method. And someone asked her about the thinking and doing it on an unprimed canvas, and she said, I didn't really think about it. It was a combination of impatience and laziness and innovation. She was just kind of eager to get started. But when you put paint on an unprimed canvas, it's going to soak into it in unpredictable ways, and you have less control over it. So that was the result of doing that. This is a picture of her for a spread that came out in Life magazine. And you'll see this is the cover of, there's another book over there, Fierce Poise, which is a new biography of Helen Frankenthaler. It's excellent. I recommend it. Interestingly enough, the picture on the right is called Tutti Frutti, and it's acrylic. So she must have devised the same method, probably using water to dilute the paint to get that same effect. Love this one. It's called Royal Fireworks, and this is kind of makes me think of the color field. Color field is where you have big expanses of just solid color. This one's huge too. It's like 5 by about 13 feet. Enormous. This is Helen doing it. Soak stain.
I first saw Jackson Pollock's painting at a show we had at Betty Parsons in the fall of 50. And I think what I particularly responded to was that there was an all at once, overall, this happened quality to it. I had to develop my own technique, but I think technique determines aesthetic as much as one's aesthetic determines a new medium. I don't want a border or line or strip all the way. The making of them, controlling them, and the surprise from them is a gesture that I do.
Supposed to stop there?
Best.
Thank you.
first saw Jackson Pollock's painting at a show we had at Betty Parsons in the fall of '50. And I think we're
Sorry. We were there?
Yeah.
technique, but I think the technique determines
That's
better as much as one's aesthetic determines a new medium. I don't want a border or line or strip all the way. The making of them, controlling them, and the surprise from them is a gesture that I do best.
That was it, okay. And this painting is called The Bay from 1963, also acrylic. Interesting bit of trivia connected to this one. In 2006, a 12-year-old boy vandalized the painting with chewing gum. It was restored, and Lissy and I were trying to figure out where the gum might have been. First I thought it was here, and then Lissy thought maybe it was somewhere up here, but I don't know. Helen passed away at the age of 83, December 27, 2011, at her home in Darien, Connecticut, after a long unspecified illness. And she's remembered as one of the major abstract expressionist painters of the 20th century, creating, as we saw, the soap stain method, which led to the color field movement. And her paintings are most commonly referred to as lyrical. Lyrical abstraction, meaning that very loose and free-flowing lines, and sometimes a little figurative, as opposed to the abstract art that's really straight and straight lines. Okay, we have Grace Hardigan, also second generation. Grace was a Jersey girl. She had no formal art education. She sometimes signed her art as George Hardigan, because she was a fan of the writers George Sand and George Eliot, I believe. She's the only one that was a mother, and she was actually the most successful in the 50s. To just give you an idea of that, in the year of 1954, she made $5,500, and Jackson Pollock made $7,000. So the $5,500 in today's money would be $60,500. Doesn't sound like a lot when you consider how much this art sells for now, but that was a decent living at the time. She defied categorization. 1957 Life magazine photo essay called her the most celebrated of the young American women painters, which is interesting because to me, I think she's probably the least known of these today. She was also an alcoholic, and she did get sober in 1983. As far as I know, she did remain that way. Oh, by the way, whoops. This is a cool picture of the 3 second generation gals. So it's Joan Mitchell on the left and Helen Frankenthaler in the middle and Grace on the right. And then also on I love the picture on the right. It's very kind of androgynous. And she didn't care about labels about femininity. That was just totally irrelevant to her. Another picture from the magazine showing you the scale of her work here. Another interesting aspect to Grace is that she had a very close romantic relationship with Frank O'Hara. He was a homosexual, so it was completely platonic, but they loved each other deeply, and he is known as the love of her life. She did have a few marriages that never seemed to work out. O'Hara was killed. He got run over on Fire Island one night. He was 40 years old. They had been estranged for like 6 years because she moved. She got married and moved away, and he didn't want to forgive her for that. But they did reconcile right before this accident happened, and she was totally shattered. She painted this painting right after his death, and the painting's called Frank O'Hara. is Grace.
Was very much interested and influenced by what came to be known as abstract expressionism. What happened when I left New York and married my late husband is I found myself in a provincial town. Here I went from the Lower East Side filled with postcards and loads of subject material to popular culture that I was from. I came into a provincial backwater. I felt tremendously isolated. I didn't have any friends here. I think that looking back, I did 3 Pallas Athena paintings in that period. And I think I chose Athena for myself because she was full blown from the head of Zeus. She had no nurturing, and she was an intellectual goddess. And I was finding my way to find an abstract expressiveness in my own voice. This painting is completely abstract. The painting is the image. Every part is as important as every other part. And the painting projects from the surface rather than receding as it did with perspective. I'm a process artist. You start off with an idea, and then ideas keep coming as you're creating. And eventually the painting tells you what it wants.
Well said. These are a couple of her paintings, Summer Street on the left and River Bathers on the right. You can almost sort of see, like here, this is a figure. That was actually, I believe it was Elaine de Kooning that she depicted in here. So the art critic Irving Sandler once asked Grace if a male artist ever told her she painted as well as a man, and she replied, not twice. Grace passed away in Baltimore at the age of 86 in 2008 from liver failure, and today she is known as one of the seminal figures of abstract expressionism. She's particularly known as an expert colorist, and she started to delve into the beginnings of pop art towards the end of her life. The last of the 5 is Joan Mitchell. She's also second generation, the only one that didn't come from the Northeast. She was from Chicago. She painted from nature and poetry. She was also a friend of Frank O'Hara. She enjoyed a privileged upbringing, and she lived in France. Her favorite quote was, "I carry my landscapes with me." And I found out that she had something called synesthesia and a photographic memory. So synesthesia is a neurological thing where you equate, sounds with colors, or letters or numbers with colors, and that type of thing. So you can sort of get that. It's not showing up so good on the screen, but if you get a chance to take another look at this painting, the colors are so beautiful and rich. This painting on the right is called, it's got a long name. Let me tell you exactly what it is. George went swimming at Barnes Hole, but it got too cold. That is the name of that. And furthermore, that is George. So she was attached to her doggie. Now, just to get a sense of the size and the scale, I just think that that's so important. This is from the Baltimore Museum of Art, and earlier this year they had a huge Joan Mitchell retrospective. Joan was not a wife of, she She only had a short 3-year-long marriage to Barney Bresson, who was one of the publishers that published the work of Jack Kerouac. And she passed away at the age of 67, which was in 1992 from lung cancer. Now, when I was going through all this research, it occurred to me that there was very little diversity in the New York school. So I'm like, there has to be more. So, of course, there's Alma Thomas. And she is incredible. She wasn't in New York, but she was an abstract expressionist at the same period of time that we're discussing. She didn't start until after she retired. She was an art teacher for 38 years. And the first African-American woman to solo at the Whitney. The Obamas are huge fans of hers, and they brought her work into the White House. So she's the first African-American woman artist to be shown in the White House. Everyone's asking me if any subsequent presidents have taken it down, and I don't know the answer to that. So that will remain unknown. Through color, I have sought to concentrate on beauty and happiness in my paintings rather than on man's inhumanity to man. I think that when you think about the time that she lived through times of Jim Crow and all, that she certainly was witness to that in humanity. I love this too. This is my favorite. She wrote, "Once upon a time it was said," because she never married, let me preface it with that. It was said, "Don't die having a miss on your tombstone." I feel very proud of having maintained my miss. I say that miss stands for all the jackasses I missed in my life. Amen, Alma. So this is a great picture of Alma's work that shows how this is how she painted in the beginning, and she evolved to this. And I called it her mosaic style because it looks like mosaics, but it's actually paint. And it's kind of cool because this painting is called Blast Off, and it was painted in 1970, and she did a whole series on kind of the space, NASA and all the space stuff that was going on at that time.
When was the one on the left?
The one on the left was painted in 1960. So today, Alma Thomas is known as a major painter of the Washington Colorfield School. Efforts of other female artists of color during the 40s and 50s, they don't seem to have been recorded because I looked, but once you get to the 60s onward, I started to find a lot more men. Today, of course, luckily we're enriched with a lot more diversity, especially now. The other woman I found that was very interesting, and she is still alive, is Howardina Pindell. And she was featured along with Alma in 2014, Beyond the Spectrum, Abstraction in African American Art, 1950 to 1975. Her work is cool if you look at this. She cut out hundreds of tiny paper dots with a standard hole puncher, collaged them into cutout and quilted canvases, and smothered them in layers of acrylic, dye, sequins, glitter, and powder. So that was kind of original and interesting. So, what can you do? Okay. There's a couple of things I'd like to tell you about. Again, Hall says it best, look for artists overlooked by history. In any major biography or monograph about a famous male artist or art movement, there will be women mentioned in passing. Investigate these names. Chances are these artists thrown away by history were excellent artists themselves. And sometimes they weren't just artists, they were also gallerists, they were dealers, they were people in the art world that weren't exactly artists themselves. Paul is the founder of LessThanHalf.org, which is an organization that promotes education of women in the arts. There is also the National Museum of Women in the Arts, which is located in Washington, D.C. You can be a member. They have all kinds of cool online events going on. It's totally worth it. I love it. Right now, the building is being renovated, and I believe late next year it will be open. But they have an extensive collection of women's art. I hope to see one day. Also, I have a mailing list there, and I am compiling a list of resources that includes videos, books, articles from the internet. So if you would like to be emailed a copy of this and you put your email down, you'll get one and you'll get notified of any future talks that I give. And check out the books over there too. They're amazing. And I think that's all I've got today. Do you have a question or a comment or anything? Did you know all that stuff? No?
Have their prices gone up now that they did?
Yeah, the prices definitely are going up, but they really don't hold a candle to the price of men's work still. Yeah. So, anyway, thank you, Ellie. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking about the sale of 450 billion, whatever it was, by a Saudi prince, and thinking Saudi princes shouldn't be the gold standard of how the art market is measured.
Right.
It's if we're gonna wait for Saudi princes to start buying women's art,
It's
we're
not
gonna
gonna
wait never.
Yeah. So it's really not about the art. And you're right. And one of the things that I like about Less Than Half, I don't know if you know about that organization, but one of the things that she's seeking to do is to reach collectors and try to be a bug in their ear and educate them about the existence of art by women. So, but she has like a membership group, and it only opens a few times a year. It's like $15 a month, but you really get, I think, some incredible information out of it. Every week they share what's going on in the art world as regards to women. So I like that. And Ellie Shore is a big deal in the local art world, so I'm very excited and happy that she came to the talk today. Ellie has her own art salons. Do you want to tell people about that?
Yes, they've now been renamed. I think you may have seen that notice, as South Florida Art Salons. And they are virtual, they're online on Zoom once a month from October to May. And there's a website you can sign up. There's a big link at the top, just put in your name. South Florida Art Salons. They're free, they're on the first Tuesday night of the month. And they're really impressive artists from South Florida, whether Palm Beach County, Broward, or Langham. And we record them, they're all archived. There's a YouTube channel now. It's very exciting. Yes, I was at the Armory for 10 years, and I've just now, we've happily, respectfully parted company.
That's why I recognize it.
Yeah.
It's coming
Yeah.
together.
Where is it located?
Huh?
Where is it located?
Well, it's on Zoom, so
Oh,
it's all online now. We were at the Armory, for 10 years, and they were wonderful, and it was wonderful. And then, but COVID came and we had to switch to Zoom, and I discovered that there are such advantages to being able to stay at home and not have to rush to be in West Palm Beach at 6:30 at night. And so we stayed with that format.
And you can also view any of the past salons.
And you're on YouTube now. Flo spoke at several of my early art salons, And I haven't heard
The
it for
really- the
years,
really,
so I
really
saw
ones,
this and I
yeah.
said, oh, wow.
Yeah, and then she started having an exhibit at the Armory for the people that had been in the salon, so that is how I did get to exhibit at least once at the Armory.
And you were in one of those, and we were the
Yeah.
first of those shows.
Yeah, I was in the first one, yeah. Yeah, but anyway, well, thank you so much.